And you're listening to Mental Breakdown.
Today about what we would tell parents if their kiddo is making a traumatic disclosure. So think substance abuse, think any sort of like abuse, bullying, anything like that. So I'm curious how often that comes up for you guys in sessions, if you have kind of like an estimate of how many times you've had to like work through that.
I think for me, often, but I think often because my primary source, my clients are typically kids and adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
A lot.
Okay. What about everybody else?
I would say less often for me for the same reason but reverse. My primary caseload is not children. So I haven't had too much experience with that.
Okay. What about Lucy, Chantal? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I would say my experience is pretty similar to Darcy's. I've come in connection with it quite a few times. So, yeah, working with teens and children, it comes up quite a bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think recently I've had a couple of different clients that have had instances of that occur where they've already had discussions with their parents and we're kind of working on the repair of a negative reaction of something
Okay.
that was said or disclosed. So
Okay.
more recently now.
What have been the negative reactions, if I can ask?
I think the big ones that I've been hearing most recently are either shifting, I think the parents being upset and I think a little overwhelmed by the information that was shared, specifically regarding any
Mm-hmm.
sexual abuse or sexual abuse specifically with individuals that are part of the family unit, like an uncle or a grandparent or an extended family member, where there's sort of this almost like disbelief that this person that they trusted so much could do this to their child. And so it puts, I think, my clients, the teens, in a little bit of a tough spot of having to almost like over explain
Mm-hmm.
things to get the parents to really understand the gravity of what happened, when a lot of times, in a couple different instances, the parents aren't quite ready to like cut certain family members off that want to be related to the person that did
Yeah.
the abuse. So just lots of layers.
It's complicated for sure. What would you guys say to parents like that, that maybe have like the disbelief or maybe aren't ready to implement healthy, safe boundaries to protect their kids?
I think the first thing that I say to parents is I try very hard to validate their experience and then try, I think, very hard to kind of have those hard conversations about the guilt I think that most parents feel, because I think that's the immediate thought is what happened, why was I not able to protect my child.
Yeah.
And I think I spend a lot of time saying to parents like it wasn't your fault and like you can't be everywhere all the time. um, and so I think reinforcing that conversation is really, really important. But then I also have the conversation, especially when we're dealing with like a situation like Chantal's talking about, when you're talking about somebody that's really close to you, we have those conversations
Mm-hmm.
that it's not your fault for trusting somebody and having someone in your life, because we don't have these expectations when we have people that are close to us that they're going to turn around and hurt us. I tell people it's like we're not born to think that way. And so I think having those conversations with parents and making that, trying to normalize that for them, I think is the best place to start, because I think they're dealing with a lot of emotions. And so I think getting them to a place where they're not personalizing it so much helps them be able to kind of process safety.
Okay. I'm writing notes because I have things I want to come back to, so I don't want to forget it.
Like I love everything you said, Darcy, about like having that conversation and like validating that they're having an experience in that, and that, even, I mean, like the stages of grief kind of come to my mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then I think the other thing that comes up for me is think like a conversation about what are the immediate safety concerns is this child safe? Is this other person around? Like, what does that side of it look like?
Yeah. Well, and then having a conversation of like what we have to do as mandated reporters if the parent doesn't believe the kid and the kid's still going to be around the abuser, and sometimes, well, maybe most of the time, I will tell parents, not that I work with a lot of teens anymore, but I do work with adults where like stuff has come up in session and they're telling me about what happened. And it's like, look, like I would have to make a mandated report if they still had contact with this other family member or neighbor or coach or whatever it would be. And I think sometimes for clients that really resonates with like, oh, this is a big deal. Like I could get in trouble if I don't keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I never want to make those reports, but sometimes we have to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we've had to shift to, which I think has changed a lot in the last 5 to 7 years within like our legal system, is that I think that we used to have this really strong pattern of keeping kids safe and separating them from a person who hurt them, and that is not the case anymore. And so there is not a big push these days to separate kids who have been hurt. They allow people to remain in homes and things like that. And so safety then becomes an even more important factor to talk about, which is like, how do you protect your kids when they're staying in the house with someone who hurt them? Which I think is a really difficult thing for parents to wrap their heads around as well. So I feel like they're stuck, right? Like there's no good answer, like either my family's separated or we're on high alert all the time. And so that can make safety planning a really important conversation in all of our sessions with those clients.
Are you talking about like kids that have been sexually abused or any kind of abuse?
Right now, it's any kind of abuse.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. There was a pretty big shift with other forms of abuse first. And I feel like the sexual abuse was the last to kind of stick it out in terms of separation. And I would say in the last 2 years, like, I mean, there used to be a time where nobody remained together. And now I would venture to say that 90% of these kids are able to remain living with the person who hurt them.
That's so sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very sad.
So what
and to make it difficult to do therapy with the victim in the situation, because finding a way for them to feel safe is really difficult. And then I think that ties into like, how do the parents create that safety for them?
Well, yeah, because the kid's probably going to feel like my needs don't matter. My safety doesn't matter. Like nobody cares about me. Nobody's protecting me. That's so sad.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And what comes up for me thinking about that and like being a systems-based therapist is that whole idea of it's so hard to have, I guess, like really long-term going back to the space that is safe or the space that is causing a lot of these problems or insecurities or unsafe feelings. And so it's like that adds a whole other challenge of making progress in therapy, and then you're sending their child back to a home where their nervous system probably feels like it's on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of it would just be, how do I help you survive? What are coping skills? Like, can we get you out of the house? Like, can you get a job? Can you do like extracurricular activities? Here's what your rights are. But I'm just thinking, even from like a clinical lens of, then how often are we making more mandated reports? Because who knows what the person is doing, or if we're getting reports, it's like we do have that due diligence to make the report, and like knowing that the system probably isn't going to do anything sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which I think is the other side of it too, which I think that we have to deal with as therapists, which is when we have to have these heavy conversations and have to talk to parents about disclosures, we have to figure out a way to do that in a way that's connected and compassionate, so that those parents then don't stop telling us things or don't start telling their kids not to tell us things, because I think another reaction parents can have is to just be afraid
Yeah.
about what can happen to their family if other people come in, or DCS has to come into the home. And so that's a really important conversation too, is like, how do I maintain this relationship so this family continues to trust me,
Yeah.
so that we can help them work through this, as opposed to them being upset and then leaving therapy and us not knowing what happens with that family.
Yeah. So, what advice would you guys tell parents in this situation? I know, Darcy, you talked a little bit about like building that rapport, really leaning into it's not your fault, you can't be everywhere at once. But I'm curious if there are things that are kind of like general things that you tell parents when there has been any sort of abuse or neglect or any sort of trauma from a kid.
I mean, I think I always tend to start, obviously, with the it's not your fault, let's have a conversation. I also am probably different. I mean, and I don't know, maybe I'm not different. One of the first conversations I have when I have kids come into therapy with the parents is like what their confidentiality looks like.
Yeah.
But I always tell the kids, like, there will be things that come up in therapy that we may have to discuss with your parents. And so I always have that conversation about us figuring out a way to have the conversation with the parents together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there are some schools of thought where it might be the easiest thing to kind of separate the kid out of that situation. But I would say for me personally, the majority of the time, I like the kid to be a part of that, because again, I don't want this child to make this major disclosure and then again feel like all the adults have gone into another room and you're talking about me behind my back.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having the kid in the room helps a lot with that, because then the focus is more on the emotion of what happened, and then you can see your child, and so I think you're more inclined to be focused on safety for them as opposed to the anger and like all of that other stuff. So I think it helps a lot when we have disclosures like that, in my opinion, to kind of have the kid involved for at least part of it, because that conversation I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
I can elaborate on that a little bit. I think too, there's times when, and Darcy, I don't know if you would agree with this, sometimes you have a parent that is very reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I will actually, and I will have a conversation with the child and let them know that I'm going to do this, but sometimes I will meet with the parent first individually just to allow them to get their initial reaction out without the child having to see it. It really will like vary just based on like what kind of parent they are, right, and how reactive they are, because sometimes that reaction can be the thing that like either really scares the kid, really shuts them down, really makes them never want to come to their parent again, right? And so being able to then help the parent like get through that reaction and then figure out how they're going to react when we do bring the child in, and then have, you know, whatever that conversation or disclosure will look like, just to kind of prevent that child from then having to go through another thing that feels shameful, scary, not good. So what do you think about that, Darcy? Would you agree?
I agree. And I think that you made the perfect point, which is like, usually for us, we have some indication and some understanding of how a parent's going to react. So then we have to, you know, make our moves based on that. So I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I think that that's also just a part of the rapport, right? Like being able to meet with that parent and say like, hey, I want to allow you to kind of get out whatever you need to get out, whatever you need to say, whatever big reaction you need to have before we then meet with your child, so we can make sure that the reaction that you have with them in the room isn't maybe so, I don't want to say destructive, but like could potentially be destructive or cause the child to feel worse than how they're already feeling.
Well, and I think also then in that, like coaching them on here's what would be helpful to do when your kiddo discloses this, when we're talking about it. Here are things that are helpful. Here would be things that are not helpful. So what would be helpful is showing unconditional love, positive regard, like letting them know we're going to get through this, that you believe them, versus disbelief, anger, frustration, things like that. Or like blaming them. Like I've had clients that have like blamed their kids for whatever's happened, and it's like, okay, well, it's not the kid's fault that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Can
that's go ahead.
Go ahead, Darcy. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think that that's a really important conversation to have with the parent and with the kid in the room, right? Because that's part of the struggle is like sometimes that time that we have with that child might be the only source of validation and safety that they may receive. And so it's really, really important, I think, for them to know and understand that they do have an adult that's on their side, and will hold their parents accountable in those kind of situations, because that can be difficult when you're being told something completely different at home than what you're being taught in therapy.
Yeah. And kind of just touching on like the more so with the child and less of the parents, something that I try and do, especially if it's something that can be very shameful for kids, like sexual abuse, is, how do I word this? I try to do my best to not have a big reaction or something that's going to make them feel like this is super taboo, like this is not good, right? Like I try to avoid at all costs giving them a reaction that's going to make them feel either more scared, more shut down, more shameful, whatever that may be. And so not like normalizing it by any means or having no reaction to it, but I'm not going to gasp. I'm not going to put them deeper into possibly those negative feelings. And so I think that's a really big part of also building the rapport with the child. Is the last thing they want to do is tell someone and then have someone
be like,
freak out or make it.
Gosh, that's horrible. Yeah, no.
Right.
I will sometimes, even in that situation, like you said, acknowledge, like the pain, even acknowledging the discomfort of sharing. And then I thank them for sharing that with me, for trusting me enough to be able to share that really probably hard piece of information. And I will even sometimes say, like, look, like, this is a judgment-free zone. Like, I'm here for you. This doesn't change our relationship or how I feel about you, how I look at you, I guess, depending on, my rapport with the kiddo or, the presenting concern or things like that. Because some kids will be like, oh my God, I already knew that. Like, why are you saying that? Where some kids need to hear that, because I think for a lot of people, not even kids, adults as well, when they are the victim of, let's say, like an abusive relationship, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, there already is that belief of like, it's my fault. Like, what did I do? There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. So there's a lot of blame that's already this internal dialogue. And I think, being able to just be aware of that. And that goes back to, Darcy, like what you said of like, hey, you can't be everywhere at once. And I think with like kiddos, being able to say like, this shouldn't have happened to you and it's not your fault.
Definitely. Yeah. And a question, anytime there has been some form of sexual abuse, I feel like a question that my kids will always ask me is like, do you know any other kids that this happened to, or have you worked with any other kids that this happened to, right? And what they're looking for is comfort, right? They want to know that they're not the only person that has ever had this happen to them. And so, even if, let's say I didn't know someone or I hadn't worked with a kid that went through that, I'm often going to say yes, because there are people and other kids in the world your same age that have gone through this. And the last thing we want to do is make them feel more isolated, more alone. And I think there's also really something to be said about boys who go through sexual abuse and how that feels very, very scary, I think, and also shameful. I think any teen boys or adolescents or children that are boys that I've worked with that have experienced sexual abuse, it's a much different process for them than for girls.
Especially if it's male on male abuse.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's where you see more of the we call it a disclosure disaster, right? Where you're talking about the disclosure sometimes is often more traumatizing than the actual abuse because of how people react. So I think Lucy, kind of what you were talking about in terms of part of our responsibility is to regulate, right? Because we help our clients regulate just when we're regulating on our own accord. And so I think that that's something that's really, really important and ties, I think, back into those moments when you say sometimes you have to pull a parent to the side because you know that that will completely dysregulate the child.
Yeah.
And so is that the safest option to help that client keep their emotions intact?
Well, and I even like asking the kid, like, how do you think your parents would respond to this if we, like, if and when we tell them, not if, because legally and ethically we have to, but how do you think they're going to respond? And letting them have some say in it too, of, I think they're going to be horrible, so we're going to do that kind of like session first with the parents, like you guys are talking about, and then bring the kiddo in.
Yeah. Something that hearing you guys talk was coming to my mind a little bit was having a conversation with the parents in the beginning at some point of like right away, honestly, that it's normal to not have like all the information, all the details come out right away. And I feel like there's like an urgency. Parents want that information. Obviously, there's like layers of fear, but it's really important to not rush the child and not re-traumatize them and trying to like get details of this information out, and really just being cautious of like going at their pace, you know, feeling it out. And I just think reminding parents like to kind of allow that process to be.
Well, and why are the details important?
Exactly.
And what details are important? Because I don't know that they need a play-by-play of every single thing that happened, but it might be helpful to know, like, okay, how long has this been going on? Do you know if other people have been involved? Like, how did this start, or what happened? Like, can you give me the broad strokes of what sort of abuse happened? Even though I think sometimes giving more details can be really traumatizing for the kid and for the family members.
Yeah, and I think if you are a parent who doesn't know, if your child discloses something like this to you and you don't know what the heck to do with it, because that's fair if you don't, consider putting your child in therapy, right? Like, this would be a great opportunity for you to get support from a professional who kind of knows how to navigate through this and ask the right questions and take it at the proper speed. And so if you are in that type of situation, this would be a perfect and great opportunity to, you know, start doing some type of therapy.
Well, and I even think I love that. And saying, you know, a parent can say, look, like, I don't even know what to say to this, but I love you. I'm here for you. We're going to get through this. You know, we're going to figure this out together. And I think just giving that reassurance of, like, from parent to kiddo, like, we're good and this doesn't change our relationship.
Yeah.
I think I try to tell parents too that there's a big difference between like us doing kind of a form of traditional kind of trauma therapy versus like what a client might be doing or what a kid might be doing in terms of like forensic stuff.
Yeah.
And so I try to tell parents that like that those kind of details and that level of information is something that they do forensically in terms of like charges and things like that for legal reasons. And for us in terms of therapy, like all of those details aren't necessarily important or valid in terms of us helping this child feel safe and comfortable and working through their trauma.
Right. And can even be like more traumatizing.
Yeah.
Going through those details and having them talk about it.
Yeah. And like I had a client that I worked with like years and years ago where there was a sexual abuse incident. I don't even know what it was because the client never really wanted to talk about it. So we would talk kind of about it. So I knew it was a sexual incident. I knew like a couple things, but we would do trauma therapy on like the incident. So we externalized it, we put a name to it. So it's like we could talk about it and do a lot of like the deep processing and healing without her having to then, you know, relive every single detail that happened with another person. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I kind of transition us to something different?
Yes.
Okay. Just because I think this is something that kind of different, but comes up a lot with parents, is maybe we can talk about kids who disclose, or more so like teenagers who disclose things that they're doing, like maybe they're starting to have sex, right? Or they're
or
maybe exploring substances, right? Or they're starting to go to parties and these things that really scare parents a lot of times, and especially if this is their oldest child.
Yeah.
and it's their first time kind of having these types of experiences, when the child, either, I should more so say the teen, when the teen gets caught, or when the teen tells their parents and their parents have these like really big destructive reactions to these things that are, in a sense, normal childhood development, right? And yeah, obviously that depends on what's going on. But I think it would be good if we talked about that too, because that in a form is also like a type of disclosure that kids are often having to share with their parents, or it's coming up because they get in trouble or they get caught, and how those interactions with parents sometimes are also not great.
Well, and I think it's similar to when they're disclosing like an abuse or a trauma. It's like you don't want the parent to have this like really big destructive reaction. Not that we're going to condone the behavior and like be like, oh, it's okay, like, keep doing these things or whatever. But I think, is there a way to stay calm, stay grounded, stay regulated, and talk about the dangers with it or the boundaries or things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And I think that conversation is a deep one to kind of have with parents, because part of what my conversation has to be with them is that I can hold your kid accountable and we can have conversations about safety and what these things look like, but I can't be on the consequence side. I'm not going to be down their throat about it, because then I risk losing my therapeutic rapport with that client. And I would rather my kiddo come in every single week and tell me, I went to this party and this is what happened at this party, and us be able to process through it and talk through it, than that client then feeling like, oh, you are going to chastise me, or you're going to tell my parents that I did this. And so then they shut down and no longer make those disclosures or talk about that information. And so I always try to have those conversations with parents, because I think sometimes they get frustrated because they're like, why aren't you down their throat, or why aren't you telling them?
Not our job.
And I'm like, that's your responsibility. I said, I will tell them what I think is safe for them. But if I lose my relationship with this client, then we're done. And so we want to be, I always tell parents, you want to be in a situation where your kid's talking to me and telling me these things. If something was extremely serious and you needed to know, you have to trust that we'll talk to you about that. So I always try to frame it that way for parents, that relationship and that therapeutic rapport has to stay intact. And I think that sometimes difficult for parents to wrap their heads around.
Yeah. And I do think there are some contributing factors that could make it more difficult. So like religious beliefs, parents' history and upbringing, parents' trauma history, things like that, where I think there are some times where like kids that are in a super religious family might try alcohol or weed or have sex before like they're supposed to. And for anybody who's just listening, I'm doing air quotes. And so being able to like validate the moral beliefs that the parents have, but also then giving some psychoeducation on like, here's what's normal and here's why, kids do what they do. Like, this is part of growing up. And again, not that we're condoning, unsafe or risky behaviors or things like that, but also putting some normalcy to it, because it is a very common thing. And so then how can we talk about it in context, or help the parents talk about it in context of, okay, but here's what we believe in and here's what we're worried about, versus like shame and guilt and anger and frustration. Because
and sometimes I think parents struggle too with being too rigid, and sometimes I do have to have a conversation with parents of like, and I don't necessarily say it exactly like this, but like, you are too rigid, right? And the rules are not fitting to the development of this child, right? Like, we're treating this child like a 12-year-old and they're 17, right? And in 6 months, they're going off to college and going to be living by themselves. So they're not going to have you monitoring, life 360ing their every move, all day long. And so sometimes that's it. And of course, like, you need to have the rapport with the parent to be able to have these conversations and for them to be able to be productive. And a lot of times when you look into these parents and you're figuring out, why are you so rigid, right? It often was that their parents were really rigid, right? And I've found in my work, and I'd be curious if you guys would agree, that the parents that are extremely rigid and kind of overbearing on the child, those are often the kids who are getting into trouble a lot and doing almost engaging in the risky behaviors more because it's such a taboo thing that they shouldn't be doing, right? And so I'm not saying parents should be totally loosey-goosey and allow their kids to do anything and everything, but there has to be that balance, because otherwise we make these risky behaviors just, I don't know, I feel like those kids are often more so engaging in them when their parents are super rigid about it.
Yeah. It's like asking parents, like I ask them, I say, what are the implications of telling your child, no, you can't do that all the time? Like, you have to think about that. And like parents are like, well, what's going to happen? And I always give the example, which is, I don't know how fun it is, but like I always tell people, like, I read 50 Shades of Grey because they talked about it in church and they were like, don't read that book. So I was like, all I wanted to do was be like, well, what's in it that you don't want me to read it? Why are you talking about it in church on Sunday? Right? And so what did I do? I left church and went to Target and bought the book. And so I use that example to tell parents, like, that's how quick it can happen. I said, because then you spark their interest, and they want to know why it's so important that you don't want me to do it. And I was like, having a conversation about safety and what safety looks like and how to protect yourself and how to keep yourself safe in those kind of situations goes over so much better than just saying, no, don't do that.
Oh, for sure. Sorry, go ahead, Lucy.
I was just going to say, well, then they're also having to go behind your back, right? Like, now that you've created this barrier and you've said, like, if you do this, you're going to get in trouble, or I'm going to be mad at you. Now you've created this block between you and your child, and they're going to still do it, but they're just going to hide it from you because now they don't want to get the poor reaction that they're going to get from you if you find out.
And then it's more unsafe, potentially.
Yeah.
Because then the kid's not talking to anybody, and that's the fear we have.
Yeah, and then you're losing out on potentially really good conversations with a child about, like, I mean, what is safe sex? How to practice safe sex? You can come to me, like, let's talk about that. That's a part of a comprehensive health.
Yeah.
And I feel like a child will, like, gauge, or like a teen will kind of gauge or like give a little bit of information to kind of like see where this is going to land. And then depending on that reaction from parents, it's like, okay, noted, this is not going to be something I can talk about. And then it's a shutdown. And then, it ends up being more unsafe for them. And those conversations go unhad.
Yeah.
Well, and I think part of that conversation too, Adia, is at least what I've had with my boys is like, what's consent? And I think not just for boys, but for girls too. I just only have boys. But it's like, what's consent? And what are you allowed to do or not allowed to do? And you're allowed to change your mind. And you're allowed to be vocal. And like, here's what's a yes and here's what's a no. And I think especially for men, it's good to have that side of it so that they're not pushing or taking advantage of people. But I think also for females to learn, like, I'm allowed to say no to something that I don't want to do. Because I've been seeing a lot of trauma recently with adult clients where, not that they were ever like raped or assaulted or anything like that, but it's like they would say yes to things that now they're like, I didn't want to do that and I betrayed myself.
Right. Well, and that's the conversation of the difference between consent and being coerced into something. Yeah. And that's totally different. Yeah. I've seen that a lot. A lot.
And
I feel like we spend days talking about clients and like what it means for people these days, and like the amount of times, and I mean, and not even just when we're talking abuse. I think that that's something that's significant for clients, is the amount of times that they comply and go along with something they didn't want to do, and then how harmful that turns out for them later in terms of like how they feel about themselves.
And why did they do it? Like, I'm always curious as to like why did you do that? Not because I'm like, I want to blame you or anything like that, but can we heal maybe some underlying hurt, negative beliefs, insecurities, fears, things like that, so that you don't do that again?
Yeah, I also often will, if I know they're not going to have the conversation outside of session, have a parent come in with a child and just kind of like get to know their child, more specifically their teen's character, right? Like, let's talk about what your teen, because your child is not just a prodigy of you, right? Your child is their own individual person with their own morals and values and beliefs about the world. And I think it's really healing for parents to understand their child on that level. I've had clients where their parents just kind of view them in this like really negative way, and I think it's a lot of societal norms, right? Like, oh, my kid is devious, my child is manipulative, my child is all these things, right? Because of maybe some of their behaviors. And I'll have them sit down and really just talk about things like, what does sex mean to you? And you'd be shocked to hear like what some of these kids say, and it's in a positive way, like not a negative way. And I think it's good for parents to hear that, because a lot of times we just put these assumptions on kids that they're doing things for XYZ reasons, and sometimes they're not. And so being able to have those conversations can also help parents to feel more confident in their child. Like, for example, I think something a lot of parents struggle with is drinking and driving. Like, I'm scared if I let them go to that party, they're going to get in a car and drink and drive, right? Like, totally fair and valid fear. Now let's sit down and talk to your child about what your child thinks about people who drink and drive, or thinks about what do they think about that behavior. And you'll sit down with these kids, and oftentimes so wonderful, because I don't think 20 years ago it was the same standard for drinking and driving, right? It's gradually, I think, changed and gotten better, but kids know it's wrong nowadays. Like, kids, and not every teenager knows that, but a lot of them do, and they value and believe in taking an Uber. That's the thing too, it's so convenient to them nowadays. And so having those conversations with your kids of like, hey, if you want to go to that party, that's fine. The rule is that I have to drop you off and pick you up. That's such a fair compromise to meet in the middle, right? Or I have to call you an Uber, right? If the kid's like, I don't want you to drop me off and pick me up, right? Okay, then fine. Like, I am going to be the one to call you an Uber, and I need to know you're getting there in that Uber and coming home in that Uber, whatever it may be. And so compromise too, I think, is a big thing, especially with teens, because it's also teaching them how to be independent, how to make good choices, while also still having rules and structure.
Well, and I think, sorry, Darcy, can I say one thing really quick?
Of course.
And I think that goes back to, Darcy, what you said though about that safe kind of rapport with kids, with parents, being able to say like, here are the expectations, right? And I'm not going to make this so taboo and so forbidden, but like, here are the boundaries. Because I think when kids are afraid to bring stuff up to parents, that is when they're going to drink and drive, or get in a car with somebody who's been drinking, or put themselves in a dangerous situation, where it's like, if we can have an open conversation, not that we're condoning underage drinking by any means, but we're condoning healthy relationships and safe decisions.
And I think that goes back to, like, Lucy, like the reaction, right? Which is, and that's one thing I think I have a conversation with all of my parents about, is like, there's going to be a day where your kid comes home and they went to a party and they maybe did something they weren't supposed to do. And I was like, that reaction is going to dictate whether or not they ever come and tell you anything ever again. And so I always say, like, it's the best to have that open communication, because you're more likely to get the information that you need to help your kid, as opposed to they come home and tell you they did something wrong and you immediately yell, scream, and jump to punishment. There's no conversation, there's no understanding. And so I wouldn't return and tell somebody that if that's how they responded. You know, I think you can hold your kid accountable and address consequences, but also be understanding and compassionate and talk about what they could do differently next time.
And why.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
That was all I was going to say. And why. Go ahead, Adia.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I feel like giving context when setting rules or setting like expectations is really helpful to kids and teens, especially, of like, this is why this is important, or, you know, giving context to those safety things, or this is why I'm saying no this time, rather than no just because I said so. It lands completely differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. And telling them too, like, I always encourage parents, like, tell your child how they made you feel, right? Like, when you got in that car with so-and-so and you guys, and that person was drinking and driving, it made me so scared that I was going to lose you. It made me so scared that something was going to happen to you. And a kid is going to hear that and feel that so much differently than if you just shame them, punish them, shut them down. It's going to be such a different reaction. And sometimes I will even have like those conversations with my kids, especially if I've been meeting with them for years, where I'll be like, I am so scared that you did that, or like, that makes me so worried for you and it's coming from like a really loving place. Mm-hmm. And, you know, anytime I think kids hear that, they just respond so much better because they know how they made you feel, and they're not just getting punished for something, because then that all a kid cares about is the punishment. They don't care about now why they're punished. They just care about the fact that they're punished.
Well, yeah. And I think as a mom, you know, my conversations with my boys started before the behavior started. So I wasn't waiting until they were sexually active, which I don't know that they are. They both say no, but that's besides the point, right? But like we talked about sex like before that was even like a thing, right? Before they were dating, anything like that. We've talked about alcohol and drugs before that came up, because I told my kids, I'm like, look, like I would rather us have an honest conversation about it than you hear it from like some teenagers who don't know shit about it. Like, let's talk about it. And I think that also goes back to like also modeling behavior. So like with drinking and driving, I might have a drink or two, but I will never get behind the wheel and drive if I've had a drink or two. Partly because I'm terrified of the Board of Behavioral Health and DUIs and all of that stuff. But I'm also modeling like, look, like I'm telling you kind of what the boundary is and why, but I'm also living the boundary too. So it's not like do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. Yeah. I also kind of going back to like abuse piece of it, like if we're managing with abuse, I want to point out that kids don't lie. They might lie about what they've done in terms of like drinking, sex, drugs, whatever, depending on the reaction. But if a kid is reporting, hey, this abuse happened to me, like a sexual abuse, physical abuse, the majority of the time the kids aren't going to make it up. And the younger they are, the less likely they are to make it up. Granted, there are a very small percentage of teens that will, because they're looking for attention or they need something or they're trying to like manipulate, but that's so rare. Like I can think of one client in 20 years that I think, and not even that they lied about the abuse, but I think they just like elaborated on it to make it sound worse, right? And it was already bad, but they were like adding things in to like keep their phone and like not get in trouble and like be able to do whatever they want because parents felt bad for them. But I just think that's an important reminder too of like kids aren't going to lie to you about something traumatic.
Yeah. I think it's, I don't know who I heard it from, or maybe I read it somewhere, but something along the lines of like, just because it's your child doesn't mean you shouldn't have to respect them. It's always really challenging and disappointing, sorry to say, when parents don't respect their child just because it's like, it's my child, I can treat them however I want.
No, they're not property.
And it's like, they're not your property. And they're also not just a prodigy of you, right? Like they are their own, is that the right word? I've used that twice now.
I think product. I think you mean product. Like product of the parent?
Sure. That's what I meant. Yeah.
I like both. We'll go with both.
Okay. We'll go with both. Right. But like respecting your child and who they are as a person, because if you don't respect them, they're not going to respect themselves, and they're also not going to grow up to choose a life partner that's going to respect them. I saw this person on, I think he was on TikTok yesterday, and he was talking about how he actually got his child taken away from him because he was at work, had speculations that his child was having sex with her boyfriend at home, came in, busted down the door, beat the crap out of the kid, the boyfriend, and ended up losing rights to his daughter, right? And it's like, you can't do that, right? Like you can't just treat kids poorly because you are the adult in the situation and you think that what they've done is wrong. These are also, living human beings who are going to do things, and maybe it was disrespectful to you for them to do that in your home, and that, you're allowed to have feelings towards it, but you also don't just have the right to have this huge reaction because they're a child.
Well,
and
also,
you're the authority figure.
what the kid was doing was less disrespectful than the dad beating the crap out of the boyfriend or partner or whatever. Like,
well, totally. And I love everything you just said, Lucy. And it reminds me, like, I feel like I see that a lot from parents who grew up in like a really rigid household where it was like, just that is what it is, demanding respect, like context is never given, like no means no. And they're like, well, I'm like, this is how my experience was, and I'm not like that. It's like, okay, but there's still room. You know, there's still living human beings. Like, I love that you said that, because I feel like sometimes people forget that. It's not.
Yeah.
And it's a hard process. I mean, as a parent, like, you know, because my kids are teenagers, and so I have to remind myself, okay, like, they don't need me the same way that they did when they were children. Even though, like, they still kind of are children, like, it's not like they need me to do all of these things. And so it is this, like, progression of letting go, letting them make decisions, letting them be their own person, while offering kind of guidance. So I always use like a bowling alley example of like, I'm kind of the bumpers that lets them do whatever they want, safety wise and all of that stuff, and within like legal limits. But, you know, there's also a lot of room where they can kind of try things out, whether that's a sport, a hobby, electives, like different things like that, where I'm still going to keep them safe, but I'm letting them have more control over their life. I'm not shy, so we'll have a conversation if I'm worried about like safety or things like that. I know, Darcy, you made a face at that. I know, because I give off such a shy vibe, where I will give opinions, or I will give like, hey, can I share this with you? Here's what I'm worried about. But again, I think that a lot of what we're talking about starts earlier than I think parents even realize.
I love that metaphor of the bowling alley, because I feel like it gives a good visual of there is this like back baseline to fall on. Like, we're allowed to go explore and try things and try to figure out like, where do I fit into the world? Who do I fit in with? Like, who am I? You know, as identity is being developed. And I think that backboard is a really important piece of that. You know, like, I can go try these things because I know that I have a place to land or a place to fall back to. And like, if I make a mistake, I can gauge like where that is.
Yeah. And I mean, at least for me, I get mad at my kids, don't get me wrong, because sometimes they push every button on me, known and unknown. But it's like, I'm never going to be mad at them for being honest with me about how they feel or what they did. I will thank them, even if I'm like, oh, I hate that you're telling me this on the inside, but like, thank you for sharing, like all of that. And that's hard to do, but again, it goes back to respect. It goes back to open conversations. It goes back to that secure attachment. And whether we're talking about like an abuse or some sort of disclosure about like sexual activity, substance use, things like that, like that's where we really try to help parents have that secure attachment.
Yeah. And I just want to shout out like all the dads that have been coming into therapy and trying to change the societal norm of like dads not being involved emotionally with like their kids' life and stuff, because I do think I have a lot of dads that are involved in the process, and I think it's beautiful and it's even healing for me. I think we could spend like a whole podcast talking about daughters and dads and that world, because that is, you know, I think a struggle to kind of navigate through, and I'll definitely give that to them. But yeah, that would be an interesting one to talk about.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to say too, because I mean, I love that you brought up the dads, and I just want to like shout out Adia and Manon for both making sports references a few seconds ago.
Oh, what sports reference did I make? The bowling?
The fact that she doesn't even know that she, like, I mean, bowling technically is a sport. And then Adia said something about the backboard. Like, so we're talking basketball. So I'm so proud of everybody.
Well, thank you. I didn't consider that a sport, so I'm shocked and amazed in myself.
That's hilarious, Darcy. I didn't either.
I thought of it as like a hobby, because, you know, people like go and like go bowling for fun. I forget that there's like bowling leagues.
There's bowling leagues.
Okay.
Like, there's professional bowlers.
I didn't even know I did, but hell yeah.
Yeah, me too. I'm so sportsy. Yay, go team.
Yes. That's why I was so impressed.
I hope everybody has fun.
Adia, I know you have a session, right? So you probably have to jump off. It was good to like do this with you and hang out for a little bit. So I hope you have a good session.
Yeah.